Hey everybody, Nick Espinosa, your chief security fanatic here. And today is not Sunday because that was over the Christmas weekend break. So I didn't get a chance to do this, but we are doing the last breaches of the week of the entire year. But as you can see on your screen, we are doing the worst breaches of 2021, and the ones for the very last week of December here, I will do in January for the very first breaches of the year in 2022. Now, some of these flew under the radar. I think you guys are going to find these interesting. If you disagree with me and you come up with some others, please let me know. I'd love to hear what you think are the worst breaches. But we are going to start basically with one of the biggest breaches of the year in terms of the presence that it had in media, and that was actually Twitch. They had 5 billion records hit. Now, this is the Amazon-owned streaming service, and they confirmed that they had suffered a huge data breach. Basically, human error was committed when configuring a server that created an exploitable vulnerability that led to basically tons of confidential information being leaked online. The breach basically makes Twitch, which employs over 5,000 people, one of the largest businesses of this year to basically be hit with 5 billion records. We found things like that what people were making basically streaming. Some people are making millions of dollars just having people watch them play games. It was absolutely fascinating and obviously very damaging for Amazon and Twitch. But Twitch starts us off for one of the worst breaches of 2021. And these are, for the record, in no particular order, except for the last three that I think were the biggest and most spectacular, but this is not by date here. With that, we have to talk about the Pandora papers because 11.9 million documents were leaked. And essentially, this is what went on here. In 2019, an unknown source began submitting massive amounts of documents to the Washington-based International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. These files showed a global cast of fugitives, criminals, celebrities, soccer players, international soccer stars, and others, as well as secret assets, clandestine agreements, hidden riches of the super rich. We're talking also about judges, tax authorities, intelligence chiefs, mayors, other politicians, essentially offshore banking details. This was absolutely nuts. It also had information damaging to 130 billionaires around the globe. This all came to light in 2021 and was essentially a bombshell in the upper echelons of the super wealthy, the political elite, and others. So obviously a spectacular breach for 2021, and we are nowhere near done, because with that, we've got to move on to Park Mobile. 21 million of their users were affected, and they are in multiple cities when you're trying to find parking spots. Now, essentially, they became aware of this incident in March, and it was linked to a vulnerability in third-party software that they used. They immediately, obviously, launched an investigation, and they found that basic user information, such as license plate numbers, email addresses, phone numbers, vehicle nicknames, were all accessed by the attacker or attackers. In a small percentage of cases, mailing addresses were also accessed as well. They also found that encrypted passwords were accessed, but not the encryption keys required to read them, although oftentimes you can crack hashes. And so there you go. Park Mobile, another huge data breach of 2021. And with that, this one kind of flew under the radar. But I do breaches of the week every week, and so I have a ton of notes on these kinds of things, and I went back and I chose some of the biggest oh my god moments that we had in the last basically the last year or so. But clearvoiceresearch.com got 15.7 million people affected, and essentially they learned this past April that an unauthorized user had posted a database online containing profile information of survey participants from August and September of 2015, and they were offering that information to the public for purchase. The accessible data included contact information, passwords, responses to questions that the users answered about things like health conditions, political affiliations, ethnicities, all this kind of really sensitive stuff. So if you wanted to know if somebody was, you know, one particular race or ethnicity or what their political leanings were, and you were one of these 15.7 million, you were hit. So obviously this was a huge, huge problem. Hopefully ClearVoice has that cleaned up by now. Another crazy 2021 breach. Moving on. This is another one that fell under the radar, but this was absolutely massive. This is Social Arcs, tens of millions, 214 million in total, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn profiles were exposed basically by social arcs due to an unsecured database. This quickly growing Chinese social media company or management company leaked the personally identifiable information of 214 million social media users, some of whom were major influencers and celebrities and things like that as well. Basically, this PII, these personally identifiable information, could allow anybody to piece together a full name, your information, the country of your residence, phone numbers, other contact information, especially damaging when it's high profile individuals, because that's when the stalkers come out. So this was a huge, huge problem, not to mention the fact that essentially this is a Chinese-based social media management company that is scraping hundreds of millions of information on platforms that China doesn't typically use, namely Facebook and Instagram. They've got their own versions. LinkedIn obviously is in China though. So there you go, another massive hit. Moving on, this was an interesting one from the beginning of the year. And that is Parler. That is the social media platform that basically extends itself out to be a competitor to Facebook. And we saw a political migration, essentially, of conservative all the way to extreme right people moving from the Facebooks of the world to Parler. And here we are. Essentially, they got one of the largest data breaches with over 70 terabytes of data, essentially being taken by a self-proclaimed hacktivist shortly before Amazon Web Services pulled hosting from the site in the wake of the January 6th Capitol riot. Obviously, a lot of that was coordinated on Parler, which we know now. Now, this massive data breach exposed over 99% of the entire platform's posts, messages, video data, including XF metadata, all posters, locations, dates, times, all these kinds of things. This hacktivist basically claimed that she was doing this to put this out there for the world. And once that was opened and she found a vulnerability in their API, many people started going into this and started exploiting that as well, downloading a lot of this content, including a massive amount of videos that were taken during the January 6th Capitol riot, which are now being used in those investigations. So on top of all of that, other leaked information from the site was driver's licenses, government photo issued IDs. That was basically Parler's verified citizen initiative. So if you gave them your driver's license, obviously that copy got out there as well. There you go. So that obviously it was crazy. I think I actually still do have a Parler account now that I'm thinking about it. So my information is probably dumped out there. I have this on all platforms except for Gab. I didn't even last a week on that one. I've done videos and podcasts on that, just the anger that was there. But I'm always researching social media platforms, and my daily videos are usually posted everywhere. But I do nothing on Parler anyway. But there you go. It was absolutely crazy. That was out there, but again, it's aiding the investigation into that riot. So silver lining. Moving on, because we got plenty more in 2021. We got to talk about Volkswagen and Audi because they had 3.3 million of their customers compromised. Essentially, an unnamed marketing services company is responsible for this breach. And this basically was 3.3 million users in the United States and Canada. And there you go. This basically, they left the database insecure. The vulnerable data was between the years of 2014 and 2019 and was basically accessed by unauthorized party or parties in March of 2021. And so what we are talking about is understanding the make and model of the vehicle, all of that, not to mention things like social security numbers, tax IDs, loan numbers, driver's license numbers, all these kinds of things essentially got hit for Volkswagen and Audi owners in North America. So heads up to you if you own one or have basically walked into a showroom floor and given them your information between 2014 and 2019. Beautiful cars, unfortunate security. Moving on. Let's talk about JBS USA. This is one of the world's largest meat processing companies, and they got hit with a major ransomware attack at the end of May. And basically their subsidiary JBS USA said in a statement at the beginning of June that it, quote, was the target of an organized cybersecurity attack affecting some of the servers supporting its North American and Australian IT systems. Now, JBS is headquartered in Brazil. They have roughly 250 1,000 employees around the world. And there you go. Outages in United States, Canada, and Australia as a result of this ransomware attack. And there you go. That's a huge one for this year. And a lot of people don't remember that one, but that one was one I talked about extensively. Moving on, let's talk about Accellion. They're basically a firewall vendor, and they released a patch in late December of last year, and then more fixes earlier this year in January to address a group of vulnerabilities in one of their network equipment offerings. Now, these patches or updates didn't come or get installed quickly enough for dozens of organizations worldwide, and many of them suffered data breaches thanks essentially to vulnerabilities in this Accellion product. The attackers behind it appear to have connections to the financial crimes group Fin11 and also the ransomware gang Clop. And some of the victims of Accellion were massive institutions like the entire Reserve Bank of New Zealand, the state government of Washington here in the United States, the Australian Securities and Investments Commission, their equivalent of the SEC, the cybersecurity firm Qualys that does a lot of compliance and GRC tools, the Singaporean telecom Singtel, high-profile law firm Jones Day, the grocery store chain Kroger, and the University of Colorado, and many, many more. Those are some of the big highlights, though. Accellion was a massive data breach for a lot of institutions, the quintessential supply chain hack. And finally, we have a few different finalies. These are the most, oh my God, kind of data breaches that we had for 2021. The first one is the actual NSO Group Tools. Now, if you're not familiar with this, and I've done videos on this, talking about this in different ways, videos and podcasts, I should say, and also on my radio show, what we're talking about here is the Israeli spyware developer NSO Group, and they basically increasingly became the face of targeted surveillance, of the targeted surveillance industry, as their hacking tools were used by more and more autocratic customers around the world. Now, essentially, what happened was they created essentially spyware known as Pegasus that was infecting with what's known as a zero-click infection Apple iPhones. And essentially, this gave them access to basically everything in the iPhone. And they were essentially governments, autocratic governments, were surveilling researchers, journalists, Nobel Prize winners, other politicians, all of that. More than a dozen other organizations, public forensics evidence that a number of governments worldwide, including Hungary, authoritarian Viktor Orban runs that, India, Mexico, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE were all possibly NSO customers using Pegasus to do whatever it was that they were doing. The researchers basically studied a leaked list of 50,000 phone numbers associated with activists, journalists, executives, politicians, Nobel Prize winners that were these surveillance targets, and were able to start matching this. It was a consortium of newspapers and journalists that got together to sift through this massive amount of data. That is obviously a huge, huge problem. And there you go. So basically the top echelons were being hacked by authoritarian governments. Not a good sign. Moving on, we have another major one that made a lot of waves and was an end-of-life event for a lot of businesses, unfortunately, and that was Kaseya. Now, if you recall, late last year, we had the SolarWinds attack. So obviously, SolarWinds is not mentioned beyond just the comparison here. That was basically for 2021, the most memorable supply chain attack of 2020, I should say. But the compromise of IT management software company Kaseya was another prominent addition to the supply chain attack, basically, of all of these attacks going on this year. At the beginning of July, attackers associated with the Russian-based ransomware gang REvil exploited a flaw in Kaseya's VSA, or Virtual System Administrator tool. Now, the VSA is popular among managed service providers. Basically, these are third-party IT companies that usually cater to small and mid-sized business, which is where Kaseya usually is. SolarWinds' Orion product was more enterprise. Kaseya was more small and mid-sized business. And as a result of this independent, basically, ecosystem out there that Kaseya had created, attackers were able to exploit this flaw in VSA and infect as many as 1,500 to 2,000 third-party organizations around the world. So that obviously was a huge problem. REvil set ransoms about $45,000 for many downstream victims, as much as $5 million for the managed service providers themselves, meaning you are an IT company, you were using Kaseya at all of your clients, your Kaseya got hit, therefore all of your clients get hit. all your clients owe $45,000 each. You owe $5 million. Basically, this was a massive thing. Our Evil was also offering to release a universal decryption tool for the world for $70 million, obviously a massive payday, but then the ransomware gang disappeared, leaving everybody essentially in the dark. Law enforcement got wind of this, and after SolarWinds and all of that, the United States' intelligence and law enforcement services really started popping up and doing their thing. So we'll see where that goes. But at the end of July, Kaseya acquired a universal decryptor and began distributing it to the targets and victims of our Evil. And there you go. At the beginning of November, the US Justice Department announced that it had arrested one of the alleged perpetrators in the Kaseya attack, a Ukrainian national who was apprehended in October and is currently waiting extradition from Poland, I believe, here to the United States. So it is an unfolding saga, but Kaseya was literally a life-ending event for some companies, especially some IT providers that basically did not have the manpower, the staff to be able to unscrew all of their clients that went down in one shot. Imagine having a red ball emergency for every single client that you have in one time. What is that going to do to you? What is that damage? That was absolutely nuts. And finally, we have to end this with Colonial Pipeline. Talk about insanity. Pumps in the eastern United States basically screeched to a halt earlier this year after a ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline disrupted basically the petroleum supply chain to the United States. If you didn't know, Colonial Pipeline carries 45% of the East Coast supply of petroleum, diesel, jet fuel, all these kinds of things. And they were compromised by the hacking organization known as DarkSide. The group stole about 100 gigabytes of data, threatening to release it. And as a result, US gas prices rose 6 cents a gallon. Many gas stations faced shortages once the media got wind of this and pumped this out to the world. If nobody had said anything for the week on this, there would have been no shortages, no fistfights at fuel pumps, nothing like that. They ended up paying $2.3 million in Bitcoin, but obviously that was a huge thing. Colonial Pipeline was nuts. And here's the kicker to the whole thing. The pipeline itself wasn't actually hit. I did extensive videos, podcasts, and on my radio show on this. They hit the billing system. Colonial Pipeline could not figure out how to bill their distributors of this gas. And so when faced with, you know what, we'll keep letting the gas flow and we'll figure it out later with our insurance company because they're insured for these kinds of things, versus let's just cut off the pipeline, which created a national panic. They chose the national panic option. And I think that is something that Congress will be heavily debating and possibly putting things in terms of reporting requirements, all these kinds of things around this. But obviously that's a huge problem. Colonial Pipeline, hands down, wins the most spectacular breach of 2021. Now, there are a few honorable mentions here because you're thinking, oh my God, Nick, you totally forgot XYZ. Let me give you the quick honorable mentions. I'm not going to dive into these, but T-Mobile got hit and exposed a whole bunch of user information. We're talking about millions of subscribers to that carrier. Microsoft had a really rough year with things like Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities that were being hit and exploited and all of that. And then finally, we wrapped up this year with Log4j, which was a massive vulnerability. We all had to upgrade to Log4j 2.15, which found out that it had a vulnerability. And then we had to upgrade to 2.16, which we found out had a vulnerability. And now we have to upgrade to 2.17. And Lord knows we'll be on 2.38 by the end of the year. So here we are. Those are the major ones out there, that happen. Obviously, Microsoft Exchange vulnerabilities led to data breaches. Log4j vulnerabilities led to data breaches as well, even though those are vulnerabilities, but they definitely get an honorable mention, or quote unquote honorable mention, alongside T-Mobile there. So there you go. Those were the worst breaches of 2021. It was a crazy year. And if you think I forgot one as I'm going back through my notes, because I've reported on all of this throughout the year, week to week, every Sunday or sometimes Monday, but usually every Sunday on this. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, good, bad, or ugly. Did one of these affect you? And if so, I'd love to hear how you handled it as well. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please stay private. Thanks, guys.